My name is Hannah Brooks, and I was 25 years old the day my parents handed my younger brother the future they had spent 25 years building. The entire family was there. My father stood at the front of the room, holding a set of ceremonial keys. My mother was crying happy tears. My brother stood beside them, smiling for cameras. Then my father raised his glass. "Some people are born to lead." The room applauded. Then he looked directly at me. "And some people are meant to support those leaders." A few people laughed politely. Most simply nodded, because everyone knew exactly who he meant: me. I smiled. I even applauded when my brother lifted the keys above his head. Then I quietly left the room. Nobody followed me, nobody noticed, and nobody knew that 6 months earlier, my grandmother had started preparing me for a future none of us could see. A future that would eventually change everything. But that came later. That afternoon I sat alone in my car outside the restaurant and watched my family celebrate through the windows. My father shook hands. My mother introduced my brother as the future of the company, and my brother enjoyed every second of it. I watched for a few minutes, then I started the car and drove home. Not angry, not jealous, just tired, because nothing that happened that afternoon surprised me. My brother had always been the chosen child. I had always been the reliable one. When he forgot assignments, I helped him finish them. When he missed deadlines at the company, I stayed late and fixed them. When customers complained, I handled the calls. Nobody thanked me. After enough years, reliable stops being a compliment. It becomes an expectation. By 25, I knew every corner of Brooks Industrial Supply. The vendors, the contracts, the payroll, the customers. Half the managers called me before they called my father, because they knew I would answer. But none of that mattered, because I wasn't the son. I was the daughter. That night, after the celebration ended, my phone rang. Grandma Evelyn. She wasn't the kind of woman who wasted words. "Tomorrow, 9 o'clock. Then she hung up. The next morning I drove to her farmhouse outside town. The place was simple, nothing flashy, nothing expensive. Unlike most things in my family, it looked earned. She opened the door before I knocked. "You look tired." "I am." "Good." I frowned. "Good?" Tired people stop pretending. She poured coffee and sat across from me. Then she asked a question that stayed with me for the next year. "What happens if your brother fails?" I shrugged. "He won't." "That's not what I asked." For a moment I stared into my coffee. Then I answered honestly. "If he fails, Dad will save him." She nodded. "And after that?" "Mom will defend him." "And after that?" "The family will blame someone else." A small smile appeared on her face. Then she disappeared into another room and returned carrying an old cardboard box. She placed it on the table. Inside were ledgers, invoices, loan records, receipts. The first 10 years of my grandfather's business. Years nobody talked about. Years before success. Years before warehouses and company celebrations. Back when the business almost failed more than once. I spent hours reading. The numbers shocked me. The company had survived mistake after mistake, bad decisions, failed deals, cash shortages. Nothing about success had been easy. The family always told the story, like victory was inevitable. The paperwork told the truth. Success had been earned, one difficult decision at a time. Before I left, Grandma tapped one of the ledgers. Most people inherit the victory. Then she looked directly at me. Very few inherit the lessons. Driving home, I couldn't stop thinking about those words. For the first time in my life, I stopped asking why my family overlooked me. Instead, I started asking a different question. What could I build without them? For the next several weeks, I studied those old records every night. One evening, I found a worn notebook hidden among the files. Most of it contained inventory notes and supplier records, but one sentence near the back caught my attention. If you can't survive without help, you don't have a business, you have a dependency. I read it 3 times, because at that exact moment, my brother's new company seemed to depend on everyone except itself. The office was expensive, the staff was expensive, the marketing was expensive, and every time a problem appeared, my father quietly wrote another check. Nobody called it rescuing, they called it investing. The difference existed only in vocabulary. That night, I opened a blank notebook of my own. At the top of the page, I wrote, "What do small businesses actually need?" For the next hour, I filled pages: cash flow, inventory control, debt management, payroll planning, vendor negotiations. The same problems appeared again and again. And suddenly, I realized something. Most struggling businesses didn't need motivation. They needed someone who could help them understand their numbers before those numbers destroyed them. That idea became an obsession. I spent weeks researching, weeks building spreadsheets, weeks creating systems. I worked my normal job during the day and built something new at night. Nobody knew, not my parents, not my brother, not even Grandma. Then my first client arrived, a hardware store owner named Lisa Carter. She showed up carrying bags full of receipts and paperwork. Her books were a disaster. For several days, I sorted records and traced every dollar. Eventually, I found the problem. She wasn't losing money because business was slow. She was losing money because thousands of dollars were trapped in inventory nobody bought. When I showed her the numbers, she stared at the spreadsheet in silence, then whispered, "I've been making the same mistake for years." 3 months later, her store was profitable again, not because of a miracle, because someone finally looked at the truth. Soon she referred another business owner, then another, then another. Without realizing it, I had started something real, small, fragile, but real. Meanwhile, my brother was becoming a local celebrity. Newspaper articles, interviews, networking events. My parents loved every second of it. At family dinners, every conversation somehow returned to his future, his vision, his potential. Nobody asked about my work. I didn't volunteer information. The less attention I received, the more freedom I had to build. And by the end of summer, for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for an opportunity. I was creating one. What I didn't know was that while my business was quietly growing, my brother's company was quietly beginning to break. The first crack appeared where most people never look. Behind the smiling photos, behind the networking events, behind the success stories. From the outside, my brother's company looked successful. Inside, it was struggling. Vendors were waiting longer for payments. Invoices were piling up. Deadlines kept moving. The image looked strong. The numbers didn't. I only learned about it because one of my clients worked with one of my brother's suppliers. The supplier wasn't angry. Not yet. He was worried. And in business, worry usually arrives before disaster. Around the same time, my own business kept growing. More clients, more referrals, more responsibility. I was still working from my apartment, still doing most of the work myself. Some nights I worked until midnight. Some mornings I started before sunrise. It was exhausting, but it was the kind of exhaustion that comes from progress, not disappointment. Eventually, I hired my first employee. Just one, but it changed everything. For the first time, this wasn't a side project anymore. It was becoming a real company. The next family dinner brought an unexpected moment. One of my cousins casually mentioned that several local businesses were doing well because of my advice. The conversation shifted, just slightly, but enough. For the first time, people looked at me differently. Not with admiration, not yet, but with curiosity. My father noticed too. Later that evening, he stopped me near the driveway. "I hear you're doing well." Those 6 words had taken 25 years to arrive. "I'm doing okay." He nodded, then said something interesting. "Just be careful." I studied his face. For the first time, I realized he wasn't worried about me failing. He was worried about comparison, because every bit of success I built created an uncomfortable question. If Hannah could build something alone, why had Ryder needed so much help? A month later, the biggest opportunity of my career arrived. A regional manufacturing company hired me to reorganize their finances. The contract nearly doubled my revenue. For the first time, I felt like I was building something that could truly last. 3 days later, my brother knocked on my apartment door, alone, nervous, and completely out of character. After a long silence, he finally asked, "Can I come in?" We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had built my business. For nearly a minute, he stared at his hands. Then he finally said it. "We have a cash flow problem." I listened quietly. The deeper he explained, the worse it became. Vendor debt, payroll pressure, declining revenue, failed contracts, bad forecasts. The company wasn't growing anymore. It was sinking. Slowly. Dangerously. Finally, he looked at me. "I need help. Not money, not investment. Help. Actual help." For the first time in years, my brother wasn't performing. He was being honest. The next morning he arrived, carrying several boxes of financial records. We spent the entire day reviewing documents. The numbers were worse than I expected. Every warning sign had been ignored. Every mistake had been covered by another check from my father. The company wasn't standing on its own. It was being carried. And eventually everything being carried becomes heavy. Late that afternoon, my brother finally asked, "How bad is it?" I turned my laptop toward him, then pointed at the numbers. "This company is 6 months away from collapse." The color drained from his face. For a long moment he said nothing, then quietly asked, "Can it be saved?" I looked at him, then at the spreadsheets, then back at him. Yes. Hope appeared instantly. Then I finished the sentence, "If somebody starts telling the truth." The room went silent, because we both knew the real problem wasn't money. It was denial. For the next several weeks, something strange happened. During the day, I worked with my own clients. At night, I helped my brother rebuild the company he had nearly destroyed. For the first time in our lives, we stopped acting like competitors. We started acting like adults. And what surprised me most was what I learned about him. He wasn't lazy. He wasn't stupid. He wasn't irresponsible. He was addicted to approval. Every bad decision traced back to the same place. He wanted admiration, attention, validation, and he had spent a fortune trying to buy those things. Now the bill had arrived. One night, after hours of reviewing spreadsheets, he looked at me and laughed bitterly. "You know what's funny?" "What?" "I thought you were jealous of me." I smiled slightly. He shook his head. I actually believed it. For years, he'd believed the family story. The story where he was exceptional and I was simply reliable. Now reality was teaching him something different, and reality is a much harsher teacher than family. What neither of us realized was that while we were rebuilding his company, Grandma Evelyn was quietly preparing something that would change every assumption our family had ever made. A few days later, I visited Grandma Evelyn. She was sitting on her porch with a notebook resting on her lap, watching the sunset, listening more than speaking. When I told her about my brother, she asked only one question. "Is he learning?" I thought about it for a moment, then nodded. "I think so." She smiled. "Good." That was all. No lecture, no celebration, just one word. Good. Then she changed the subject, asked about my business, asked about my plans, asked where I wanted things to go next. But something felt different. She seemed distracted, like she was carrying information she couldn't discuss. As I was leaving, I noticed a legal envelope sitting on the kitchen counter. The logo belonged to a law firm in the city. Before I could ask about it, she casually covered it with a newspaper. The movement was small, but I noticed. And suddenly several things started connecting. The lawyer references, the notebooks, the questions, the observations. Something was happening behind the scenes, something nobody knew about, especially my father. Across town, he was becoming increasingly nervous. The warehouse expansion was over budget. The bank was asking questions. Several contracts had failed, and every conversation seemed to circle back to one thing: inheritance, future ownership, future assets. One afternoon, I accidentally overheard part of a conversation at the company office. The door to my father's office wasn't fully closed. I wasn't trying to listen, but some words are impossible to ignore. Collateral, guarantee, inheritance, refinancing. Then one sentence changed everything. We both know those assets will transfer eventually. My father's voice. Confident, certain, assuming. In that moment, I finally understood. His future wasn't built on what he owned. It was built on what he expected to inherit. And that is a dangerous way to build anything. 2 days later, Grandma called. I need a favor. What kind? Bring a witness tomorrow. I sat upright. A witness? Yes. Why? A long pause followed. Then she answered. Because some things should be in writing. The next morning, I brought one of my clients, a business owner I trusted completely. Grandma already had paperwork waiting. Several pages, professionally prepared, carefully organized. I read every line. The document wasn't a gift, it wasn't a loan, and it wasn't an inheritance. It was something much more important. By the time I reached the signature page, I finally understood. Grandma wasn't preparing money. She was preparing proof. I signed. My witness signed. Grandma signed last. Then she sealed everything inside a large envelope. Across the front, she wrote a future date, months away. I stared at it. What happens then? She smiled, the same mysterious smile she always used before refusing to answer. Then she stood up. Conversation over, as far as she was concerned. Winter arrived early that year. For the first time in my life, Grandma started looking old, really old. The walks became shorter. The phone calls became less frequent. The notebook stayed closed more often. Eventually, she admitted the truth. A serious heart condition. Nothing immediate, but enough to change the future. I tried not to cry. She noticed anyway. Don't start grieving somebody who's still sitting in front of you. I laughed, then cried anyway. A few weeks later, I walked into a family dinner and immediately felt tension in the room. Everyone went quiet when I entered. My father finally cleared his throat. We were discussing succession planning. The words sounded reasonable, but something felt wrong. Then I realized what they were really discussing. Not Grandma, her assets. For the first time, I saw my family exactly the way Grandma saw them, and it wasn't flattering. A week later, my brother visited again, this time carrying guilt instead of paperwork. He sat down and said, Dad wants me talking to the bank. Why? He looked directly at me. The inheritance. There it was, out in the open. My father had been using Grandma's future assets as leverage, as certainty, as collateral, as though ownership had already transferred. My brother shook his head. He talks like everything already belongs to him. For the first time, he sounded disappointed. Not in Grandma, in our father. A few days later, Grandma called me over one last time. The house felt quieter, smaller somehow. We talked for hours, about work, life, the town, ordinary things. Then she handed me her notebook, the notebook she'd been writing in all year. I opened it. Inside were observations, questions, lessons, notes, names, dates, everything. She had documented the entire year, every conversation, every answer, every choice. "Why?" I asked. She tapped the notebook. "Because memory fades." Then she added 4 words. "Paper doesn't forget." Before I left, she stopped me at the door. For a moment, she looked exactly like the strongest person I'd ever known. Then she said, "Never confuse being chosen with being worthy." Those were the last important words she ever spoke to me. 3 weeks later, my phone rang at 2:17 in the morning. Some calls tell you everything before you answer. This was one of them. Grandma Evelyn had passed away peacefully in her sleep. The funeral drew half the town: business owners, employees, friends, neighbors, people whose lives she'd quietly improved over decades. 5 days later, the family received notice of a trust reading, scheduled 2 weeks later, at a lawyer's office downtown. The moment I saw the letter, I remembered the envelope, the witness, the notebook, the questions, the paperwork. For the first time, I realized something. Grandma hadn't been preparing a legacy. She had been preparing a decision. And very soon, everyone in my family was going to find out what that decision was. The morning of the trust reading arrived beneath a gray sky. My father was already sitting in the conference room when I arrived. So was my mother. So was my brother. Nobody spoke much. Everyone was waiting. Attorney Rebecca Monroe entered exactly on time, carrying a thick folder. After offering condolences, she got straight to business. The first few items were simple: personal belongings, charitable donations, small gifts to friends and former employees. My mother cried more than once. My father remained focused, waiting for the only thing that mattered to him: the company. Finally, Rebecca opened a different section of the folder. The majority of Mrs. Brooks's assets were placed into a family trust several years ago. My father's posture immediately changed. The trust contains controlling ownership of Brooks Industrial Supply. The room became very still. Then Rebecca continued. The trust includes specific conditions regarding succession. My father frowned. Conditions. That wasn't the word he expected to hear. Rebecca read directly from the document. The controlling ownership interest shall transfer to the family member who demonstrates the ability to independently build, manage, and sustain a successful business without direct family financial assistance. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Rebecca continued. The determination shall be based on documented evidence collected during my lifetime. Then she reached into the folder and removed several notebooks. My stomach tightened. I recognized them immediately. Grandma's notebooks. The room looked confused. Rebecca wasn't. She calmly opened the first notebook. For several years, Evelyn Brooks documented observations regarding leadership, business judgment, financial responsibility, and personal growth. Then she began reading. Notes about decision-making, notes about accountability, notes about risk, notes about character. My father shifted uncomfortably. My brother stared at the table. Then Rebecca opened the final notebook, the one covering the last year. Hannah built a profitable business without family capital. She turned a page. Demonstrates independent judgment. Another page. Solves problems instead of avoiding them. Another. Continues making responsible decisions when nobody is watching. The room was silent. Then Rebecca removed one final envelope. My name was written across the front, Grandma's handwriting. She slid it toward me. Mrs. Brooks requested this be opened during today's meeting. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a single letter, short, direct, exactly like her. Hannah, if you're reading this, then I was right about two things. First, I was right about you. Second, paper remembers what people forget. For years, people confused attention with ability, being chosen with being worthy. I never made that mistake. You built something when nobody was helping. You kept working when nobody was watching. You learned lessons other people tried to skip. Everything important was already visible. I simply wrote it down. Love, Grandma. By the time I finished reading, my eyes were wet. Across the table, my mother was crying. My brother looked down at his hands, and my father looked completely lost. Rebecca waited until the room settled, then delivered the final decision. According to the terms of the trust, controlling ownership of Brooks Industrial Supply transfers to Hannah Brooks. Silence. Complete silence. My father stared at her, then at me, then back at her. It should be mine. The words escaped before he could stop them. Not angry, just shocked. Rebecca remained calm. The trust is legally valid. My father's voice cracked. I spent 25 years building that company. For the first time all morning, I answered, no. The room turned toward me. You spent 25 years running it. I paused. Grandma spent 25 years protecting it. Nobody argued, because nobody could. For a long moment, my father simply sat there. Then something unexpected happened. My brother spoke. I think she got it right. Everyone looked at him, including me. He shrugged slightly, then said, honestly, I think Grandma saw us more clearly than we saw ourselves. Nobody disagreed, because deep down, everyone knew it was true. The meeting ended quietly. No dramatic shouting, no courtroom battle, no revenge speech, just truth. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds were beginning to break. As I stood beside my car holding Grandma's notebook, my father approached. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he said something I never expected to hear. I underestimated you. 25 years, and that was the closest thing to an apology I would ever receive. Strangely, it was enough. I smiled, then answered honestly. You underestimated Grandma. For the first time that day, he laughed. A tired laugh, but a real one. A year earlier, my father handed my brother $1 million and told me to earn my own. So I did. Not because anyone believed in me, not because anyone rescued me, but because I kept showing up when nobody was watching. In the end, my grandmother didn't give me success. She simply recognized it. She didn't create my future. She documented it. And that's the thing about being overlooked. People stop watching. And when people stop watching, you get the freedom to build something they never saw coming. So if someone underestimates you, let them. If someone overlooks you, let them. If someone gives opportunities to everybody except you, let them. Because sometimes the greatest advantage in life is being ignored long enough to become undeniable. And when that day finally comes, you won't need revenge. You won't need permission. And you definitely won't need anyone's approval. Because the results will speak louder than anything you could ever say.